I was standing in a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. when my uncle Victor Hale pointed at me and said, "That woman stole $60 million from a dying man." The room went still. Pens stopped. Even the judge leaned back as if the afternoon turned dangerous. I smoothed my hands over my dark blue Marine uniform and tried not to shake. Victor looked perfect in a charcoal suit, cufflinks flashing under the lights. On the news, he would look like a patriotic son of privilege. I looked like the scandal. Then he added, "She isn't even one of us. She never was." That was the moment I stopped fearing him. By then, I already knew his family had lied about my father for 3 decades. 3 months earlier, I was inventorying bandages at Camp Pendleton, worried about my mother's pharmacy bill and whether my truck would survive another summer. I was 32, divorced, broke, and exhausted, a logistics officer living on reheated leftovers and overtime. Then a call came from Zurich. A polished voice said, "Captain Mara Bennett?" and told me my grandfather, General August Hale, had left me an inheritance. I laughed until he said the amount, $60 million. He told me to say my father's name and ask no questions. "Captain Elias Bennett," I repeated, and the caller ordered me to Switzerland. That night, I drove to see my mother in her assisted living apartment near San Diego. The moment I spoke August Hale's name, her hands froze on her knitting. Fear changed her face before she could hide it. She said the Hales had nothing to do with us. I told her someone in Zurich said I was the general's granddaughter. "You are not going there," she snapped. When I asked why, she said, "Because they ruin people." I pushed harder, and she finally whispered, "That family is why your father disappeared." 2 days later, my half-brother, Owen, came over in a shirt that probably cost more than my rent. He mocked my duplex, then admitted he had checked the legal firm's name himself. "It's real," he said, though he still tried to laugh it off. After he left, I opened the old cedar box my mother had hidden for years. Inside were photographs, clippings, medals, and one torn picture of my mother beside a Marine officer whose face had been ripped away. I understood then that somebody had not merely left us, somebody had erased him. I flew to Zurich on emergency leave. The bank was quieter than I expected, a stone building near the lake with polished windows and no sign on the door. Inside, a receptionist smiled until I said, "My father was Captain Elias Bennett." Her posture changed at once. Within minutes, I was led through a private elevator to Walter Kessler, the lawyer from the call. He showed me a letter in my grandfather's hand and a file of military records, contracts, and newspaper clippings. My father had not abandoned us. He had been investigating fraudulent defense contracts tied to powerful men, including members of the Hale family. Walter placed a letter beside my coffee, never opened. I read the first line and nearly dropped it. He had begged her to keep me away from the Hales because they were dangerous. By the time I returned to the United States, the inheritance fight had already turned into a public war. Victor denied everything and threatened me through lawyers. A retired Marine colonel who had served with my father testified that Elias was honest, stubborn, and preparing to report corruption before he vanished. Then my mother finally admitted the worst truth. She had hidden my father's letters because she thought silence would protect me. It did not feel like protection. It felt like another theft. In court, Victor called me a fraud. I told him my father wrote for years and that his disappearance matched men who profited from missing equipment and broken supply chains. When the judge asked for evidence, Walter produced the letters, records, and journals. The story collapsed under its own weight. Victor was not charged with murder, but he was exposed as part of the cover-up that destroyed my father's career and my childhood. The estate was awarded to me. Afterward, in the cold rain outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions about revenge. I surprised myself by answering, "My father believed service mattered more than profit. That is what I'm honoring." Later, I found a photograph of my father holding me as a baby, with my grandfather beside him. They had both known me. They had both failed me. That night, I sat alone in the library, held the inheritance papers in one hand and my father's unopened letters in the other, and made my choice. I used the fortune to fund scholarships for military children, defend whistleblowers, and open a trust for families buried by official lies. Then I sent Owen to help me open the first scholarship fund before winter officially ended. It was not revenge. It was justice with a long memory.